So this is our next lesson in S2 chemistry, and following on from how each type of rock is formed, we're going to look at how all three types of rock are actually interconnected and can transform into one another in something called the rock cycle. Now this lesson, half of it is going to include revision questions at the end, because the rock cycle is something that you really will need to know for your assessment. And so I encourage you to watch the whole video and do the practice questions. So what the plan for this lesson is that you'll be able to describe the rock cycle and give an example of each type of rock at each stage of the process. So for rocks, it is a hard life. For rocks, their time on Earth can be rough. They have existed for billions of years, and during that time they may have been crushed, eroded, melted, and transformed from what they originally started as. So a rock might have started out as a piece of the planet's crust, but 4.3 billion years later, it might have been changed so much that no one would even recognize what it looks like. And this is our rock cycle that we need to know. And this is going to show some of the transformations that can happen to rocks. Now, on this rock cycle, we're going to start at the top right-hand side, because a lot of rocks actually start off as magma. Now, magma, if that makes its way out onto the Earth's crust in the form of a volcanic eruption, and that magma or lava cools down, that's where we get igneous rocks. Igneous rocks like basalt and granite. Now those igneous rocks are going to be out exposed to all the elements. So if wind keeps blowing on them, if waves keep crashing against them, if it's constantly raining on them, they can get broken down by two processes called weathering and erosion. And that turns those rocks into really small pieces of rock, which we call sediment. Now, as we know, small bits of rock called sediment, they can get blown or washed away into rivers, and from rivers, they can make it into the sea. And that process is constantly happening, and we get layer upon layer upon layer of sediment building up on one another. And what that causes is compaction and cementation. So compaction, that means the layers getting squeezed together, and cementation is when those layers fuse together to form one solid thing. So if the sediment in the sea leads to a lot of compaction and cementation, we form sedimentary rocks. Things like limestone, sandstone, and chalk and shale. Sedimentary rocks themselves, well, if they are in the water or if they are taken out of the water, they can also be broken down by the wind and the rain and by water, and they can weather and erode as well. And if they weather and erode, they form sediment, and that sediment can form new sedimentary rocks again through compaction and cementation. So sedimentary rocks can be in a constant cycle of forming the rock breaking down into sediment, and that sediment being compacted and cemented to form sedimentary rock again. Now sometimes sedimentary and igneous rocks can be exposed to a lot of heat or a lot of pressure. And we know that if rocks get exposed to heat and pressure, that they can change their form and become metamorphic rocks, which are a lot harder. And examples of metamorphic rocks are marble, slate, and quartzite. Now, metamorphic rocks, just like any other rock, if they're sitting out on the Earth's crust, the wind, the rain, and other types of weather can break it down into sediment. So if metamorphic rock breaks down into sediment, that sediment can make its way into rivers, make its way into the sea, be compacted and cemented, and form sedimentary rock. But also, because metamorphic rocks exist in the Earth's crust, sometimes if there's an earthquake or if the plates that the crust are made up of move, metamorphic rocks actually sink lower down through the crust into the mantle. And if that happens, those rocks will melt and form magma, and the process completely starts again. So you can see from this rock cycle that every type of rock is capable of, through very long processes over a very long time, transforming into all the other types of rock. Okay? So heat, pressure, and erosion are just some of the processes by which the Earth recycles rocks. The elements and minerals which make up rocks are never destroyed, but they are recycled many times over, and they change which type of rock they are found in. So if we talk through this in words, the first process is that liquid magma, or lava as we call it, it cools and solidifies to form igneous rock. This can happen, and we can see it happening on the Earth's surface in the form of volcanoes, but this process can also happen underground, where we're not really able to see it, and it can also happen under the sea, where some magma escapes, but because it's surrounded by water, it cools down very quickly. And that is how we form igneous rock. The next thing that happens is if we have igneous rock, weathering, so that's the wind, the rain, etc., can break down the rock on the surface of the Earth, and wind and water will move those broken rock particles, or sediment, away. That process is called erosion, and that's how bigger rocks get broken down into small pieces. Third process is that rivers and streams can move the rock particles to other places, and they end up, these particles or sediment get left in lakes and in seas. Layers of the sediment begin to form as more and more rock particles are deposited in the lake or the sea. And the weight or the mass of all these layers being put on top of one another compacts and cements the particles together. And that forms sedimentary rock. Now, if those rocks end up being down in the surface of the crust, so down near the mantle, they can get heated up and exposed to a lot of pressure, which will transform them, which is how metamorphic rocks form. The metamorphic rocks, if they are really close to the mantle, will get heated so much that they can melt, turn into magma. And finally, process begins again in that some of that magma can get to the surface of the Earth through volcanoes when they erupt and start to cool to form igneous rocks. So that has been the rock cycle. This diagram, I can assure you that for your assessment at the end of this unit, you will need to know that rock cycle. You won't need to draw any diagrams, but you might be asked to fill in boxes and be able to give examples of igneous rocks, sedimentary rocks, and metamorphic rocks. So for the rest of this lesson, it's going to be practice questions that you can use in order to help you remember the rock cycle. So, what are the three processes by which the Earth recycles the rocks? What are the three processes? Well, we have heat, We have pressure and we have erosion. So heat and pressure, that's ways of melting the rocks or transforming the rocks. Pressure helps to form sedimentary rocks, but also transform rocks into metamorphic rocks. And erosion is what can turn igneous rocks, metamorphic rocks, or sedimentary rocks back into sediment. Okay, so in this one, you have to choose the correct words for each part of the sentence. The elements and minerals which make up rocks are never either recycled or destroyed, but instead they are recycled or destroyed many times over. Which is the correct word for the first part of the sentence and which is the correct word for the second part of the sentence? Well, the first word, it's going to be the minerals which make up rock are never destroyed, but they are recycled many times over. What happens to liquid magma to form igneous rocks? What happens to the magma to form igneous rocks? Well, it is cooled down and it solidifies. You could, if you wanted to, call that process freezing. What causes or what breaks the rocks into particles? What breaks the rocks into particles? That is wind, water, and ice, or you could use the words weathering and erosion. Rock particles can be deposited as what on land, in lakes, or further out to sea. So what do we call those rock particles? We call them sediment. What's going to form? So if we have more and more sediment put in the same place, we get layers forming. The weight of the successive layers does what and what to the particles together? The weight of the successive layers compress and cement, or compact and cement the particles together. What kind of rock is formed when these layers get compressed, compacted, or cemented together? The answer is sedimentary rocks. Now, sedimentary rocks can become deeply buried and are heated by heat from the. So where does the heat that heats up sedimentary rocks that get buried underground come from? It comes from the Earth's core, or you could say the mantle. And what kind of rock is formed when sedimentary rocks get heated up? That is metamorphic rocks. And what are the two things that can cause a metamorphic rock to form? So two things that can cause any type of rock to change into a metamorphic rock. The two things are heat and pressure. Now, some magma returns to the surface of the Earth through volcanoes when they erupt as lava hardens. And when that lava hardens, what type of rock is formed? Is it sedimentary, igneous, or metamorphic? Well, the answer is igneous rock. Now what we've got are, all the next slides are going to have the rock cycle with some of the boxes missing. So I want you to try and identify what's going to go in those three boxes right now. So those three boxes are the three different types of rock. Okay, so the missing words are, top one is igneous rock because that's the lava cooling down. The very bottom one was sedimentary rock because that's formed from sediment. And we see heat and pressure forming the third type of rock, which is metamorphic rock. Right, what's missing now? So the word in words at the bottom right, what's missing? The words that are missing there are heat and pressure. That's what forms a metamorphic rock. Next, we've got some words missing on the left-hand side. What turns sediment into sedimentary rock? Well, the words missing are compaction and cementation, or you could say compression and cementation. And what word is missing here? What word turns an igneous rock, or words, sorry, turn igneous rock into sediment? Well, the answer there is weathering and erosion. So that has been a set of questions going over the rock cycle and how all the types of rock are made.